Don't laugh too quickly when life seems to humble someone, because sometimes the person you think has lost everything is only disappearing long enough to return with power you cannot survive. Khalil Dorojaye learned that too late. The morning he sent the invitation, he was smiling. Not because he wanted peace, not because he wanted closure, but because he wanted an audience. He wanted his ex-wife to sit in the crowd at his wedding and watch another woman take the place he believed she had failed to keep. What he did not know, what nobody in his circle knew, was that Amara Nwosu had stopped being the woman they remembered a very long time ago. And when she arrived at that wedding, in a black convoy with security stepping out before her, the music did not stop, but the room did. Because in one silent moment, every person at that ceremony understood something Khalil had never once imagined. He had not invited a broken ex-wife. He had invited the woman who now had the power to decide whether his empire survived the month. 3 years earlier, Amara had stood barefoot in their Lagos penthouse, holding a crystal glass she wasn't even drinking from. The city glittered beneath her like it belonged to richer, colder people. Inside the apartment, the air smelled of imported candles, expensive wood polish, and the kind of distance that grows when two people stop speaking honestly long before they stop sleeping in the same house. Khalil stood by the dining table, scrolling through messages, barely looking at her. The anniversary dinner she had arranged was untouched. His favorite peppered sea bass had gone cold. The champagne was warm now. The candles had sunk low enough to look embarrassed. Amara watched him for a few seconds before speaking. "Khalil?" He didn't answer. Her voice got quieter. "You said you'd be home by 8. "I am home," he said flatly, not lifting his eyes. "It's almost midnight." He finally looked up then, but not with guilt, with irritation. "You always do this," he said. "Every conversation with you feels like an accusation." Amara stared at him, stunned by the casual cruelty of a man who used to kiss her forehead for no reason at all. "I made dinner," she said softly, "and I didn't ask you to." It was such a small sentence, but that was the thing about the worst kind of heartbreak. It rarely announces itself with thunder. Sometimes it enters the room dressed like a normal sentence. Khalil loosened his tie and walked to the bar. He poured himself a drink. No apology, no explanation. Only that familiar confidence of a man who had started believing his success placed him beyond emotional consequences. Amara had known Khalil before the money, before the magazine covers, before the logistics contracts and energy deals and private investors who now laughed too loudly at his jokes. She had known the young man with one worn laptop, impossible ambition, and a hunger so raw it once felt beautiful. She had written proposals beside him, corrected contracts beside him, stayed awake during his early investor calls because he was terrified of sounding small. When his first warehouse lease fell through, she used her savings to help secure the second one. When his mother got sick in Ibadan, Amara sat in hospital corridors while Khalil traveled for meetings. When his first board nearly pushed him out of his own company, she helped him rebuild his strategy in one sleepless weekend. But people rarely remember who held the ladder once they are standing on the roof. That night, Khalil drank quietly and checked his phone again. Then it buzzed. Amara saw the smile before she saw the name. That was what hurt first. Not the betrayal, the softness. The softness he no longer had for her. "Who is she?" Amara asked. Khalil did not answer immediately. That pause said more than a confession. He set the glass down. Vanessa Mensa. The world did not end. It simply became silent. Amara blinked once. Your assistant? She stopped being my assistant months ago. Months. Months. There are answers that do not sound real the first time you hear them, because the heart refuses to let language become fact. Amara's fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. How long? Khalil exhaled like the question was inconvenient. 7 months. She laughed then, but it was the kind of laugh pain produces when tears are still deciding whether they want to arrive. 7 months? Khalil shrugged. This marriage has been over for longer than that. No, Amara said, looking directly at him now. You ended it. Quietly. Cowardly. And while I was still inside it. He didn't flinch. Men like Khalil had learned how to survive discomfort by detaching from it. You're emotional, he said. That's the problem. You always make everything heavier than it needs to be. Amara stared at him. You cheated on me. And you stopped being the kind of woman I wanted to come home to. The sentence landed hard. Not because it was true. Because for too many years she would have believed it was. He came closer then, calm, superior, almost bored. Let's not drag this out, he said. I've already spoken to my lawyers. He reached into the leather document case on the chair and tossed a folder onto the table. Divorce papers. Her eyes lowered slowly. Happy anniversary, he said. And there it was. The death of love spoken in the language of performance. Amara remembered that moment later with astonishing clarity. Not the words, not even the papers. She remembered the exact feeling that entered her chest. It was not heartbreak. It was exhaustion. The exhaustion of finally seeing a person clearly after spending years making excuses for his darkness. 3 days later, the papers were signed. No screaming, no begging, no dramatic collapse. That almost offended Khalil. On his last afternoon in the penthouse, he rolled his suitcase toward the door and turned back with a look she knew too well. He wanted to win the ending. You'll be fine, he said. You always land somewhere. Amara said nothing. He smirked. Just don't make the mistake of thinking people respected you because of you. They respected you because you were attached to me. That was supposed to break her. Instead, it branded something into memory. After he left, the apartment felt like a luxury hotel someone had checked out of too quickly. For a week, Amara barely moved. The silence in those rooms had shape. His cufflinks were still in the drawer. One of his jackets still hung behind the bedroom door. His cologne still lived in the hallways like a ghost too arrogant to leave. On the 6th night, she sat on the bathroom floor and cried with both hands over her mouth, because pain sometimes becomes more unbearable when nobody is there to hear it. But grief changes if you let time sit with it long enough. It stops being fire. It becomes information. 2 months after the divorce, Amara moved out of the penthouse and into a smaller home in Ikoyi. No staff, no spectacle, no audience. Just space. For the first time in years, her day did not begin with Khalil's schedule. That should have felt empty. Instead, it felt strange. And then clean. One afternoon, while sorting old files, she found a stack of handwritten notes from the early days of Khalil's company. Supply chain maps, market gaps, rural distribution blind spots, women-owned vendor networks banks ignored because their businesses looked too informal on paper. Amara sat there for a long time, staring at the pages. Because what Khalil had never understood was this. She had not been sitting beside power all those years. She had been studying systems. And systems did not care who broke your heart. If you understood them well enough, they could become ladders. Amara began quietly. She met with a former university friend named Tenny, who now worked in agricultural finance. Then she met a transport cooperative leader outside Abeokuta. Then a woman in Accra who ran a cross-border shea butter supply network with almost no institutional backing. Then another woman in Kumasi. Then one in Cotonou. What Amara saw was obvious once she stopped looking through elite eyes. Women were holding entire informal trade channels together across West Africa, but banks treated them like risk instead of infrastructure. So she built a company around what everyone else had failed to notice. Not fashion, not vanity, not imitation. Structure. She launched Meridian Bridge with almost nothing flashy attached to it. The company started by underwriting verified women-led supplier chains, digitizing payment histories, securing lower-friction transport contracts, and connecting overlooked producers to larger export buyers who had previously ignored them. It was not glamorous. That was exactly why it worked. While Lagos society obsessed over visible wealth, Amara was building invisible leverage. For the first year, nobody important talked about her. That helped. Silence is useful when you are becoming dangerous. She worked 18-hour days, read contracts until dawn, traveled with one carry-on bag and a notebook that never left her side. Some hotels were so bad the water barely ran. Some meetings ended with old men smiling politely before telling her to come back with a male partner. Some investors listened for 12 minutes before asking whether she had the temperament to scale. Amara learned how to end meetings without looking offended. She learned that half of power is competence, and the other half is refusing to appear desperate for recognition. In the second year, Meridian Bridge stopped looking small. A regional export consortium signed a long-term supply agreement. Then, a development bank extended structured backing. Then, a tech platform managing agricultural records partnered with her company to formalize transaction histories across thousands of vendors. Then, a private equity group from Nairobi asked for a meeting. Then another from Johannesburg. By the time business magazines started printing her name, Amara had already built the one thing Khalil valued most. Relevance. Not loud relevance, not social media relevance. Structural relevance. The kind that enters rooms before you do, because money has already heard your name. Meanwhile, Khalil Durojaye was doing what successful men do when success hides their blindness. He kept winning publicly. His company, Durojaye Freight and Energy, expanded aggressively. He bought properties, hosted panels, took photographs with ministers, entertainers, venture capitalists, and people who only became humble around cameras. Vanessa moved from assistant to fiancée with such smooth speed that society pages began treating the story like an upgrade rather than betrayal. She was beautiful, polished, and ambitious in ways that pleased him because her ambition never questioned his centrality. When Khalil saw Amara's name once in a finance column, he smiled at it dismissively. "A little consulting company," he said to a board member. But 6 months later, the same board member mentioned Meridian Bridge again. Then again. Then, one morning, Khalil walked into a closed investor briefing and heard a sentence he did not like at all. Meridian has begun influencing corridor financing on 3 trade routes. His face remained calm, but something cold moved behind his ribs. Because influence was one thing, control was another, and Amara was drifting from the first toward the second. 3 years after the divorce, Khalil announced his wedding to Vanessa. It was not going to be intimate. Men like Khalil do not marry quietly when they believe the wedding can function as a final press release about their superiority. The ceremony would be held at a luxury estate outside Accra, overlooking the water, full of business elites, politicians, social figures, and cameras discreet enough to preserve the illusion of class while documenting everything important. The guest list was strategic. The flowers were imported. The menu had been reviewed 4 times, and 1 week before the wedding, Khalil did something small, cruel, and deeply revealing. He sent Amara an invitation. Not through an assistant, not through legal courtesy, directly. Inside the envelope was a handwritten note. I thought it was time we were mature enough to celebrate how life works out for the people who accept reality. She read it once, then again, then set it down beside her tea without expression. Her chief of staff, Zubair, looked at her carefully from across the office. "You're not actually considering going, are you?" Amara leaned back in her chair and looked through the glass wall of her office at the city below. In the last 3 years, she had learned that there are moments when life offers you revenge in cheap forms. Anger, public scenes, emotional speeches, the temporary pleasure of proving you were hurt. And then there are rarer moments, moments when dignity becomes sharper than rage. She picked up the invitation again. "Who else is attending?" she asked. Zubair gave her a look. "You're serious?" "Who else?" He checked the list quickly. "Apart from the obvious," he said. "Board members, 2 sovereign fund advisors, Mensa family partners, the Cairo Consortium chairman, some freight investors from Dubai, and," he paused, "representatives from the Atlantic Corridor Financing Committee." That made her eyes shift. The Atlantic Corridor. A major infrastructure financing round, one Khalil had been quietly chasing for months. What Khalil did not yet know was that Meridian Bridge had already become part of the advisory group, helping determine who would be trusted with the downstream execution layers on that exact corridor. The wedding had just become more than social theater. Amara closed the invitation. "I'll attend." The morning of the wedding, the estate glittered. White roses curled around every arch. Crystal chandeliers had been suspended beneath custom drapery. Staff moved with trained efficiency. The string quartet sounded expensive enough to make even bored people sit straighter. Vanessa looked radiant. Khalil looked victorious. He stood near the entrance, greeting guests with the particular smile of a man convinced that everyone in the room was there to confirm his version of history. And everywhere around him, people did what people always do around visible power. They played along. "You look incredible. What a beautiful day. Perfect match. Perfect setting. Perfect future." Perfection is often just an expensive costume rented for a few hours. By late afternoon, the estate was full. The ceremony was minutes away when Khalil checked the guest list one more time and asked casually, "Amara didn't respond, right?" Vanessa adjusted her bracelet. "Why would you even invite her?" He smiled lightly. "Closure." Vanessa looked at him. "No," she said. "That wasn't closure." He said nothing, because even he knew that word had not belonged to what he was trying to do. The first sign came from the outer gate. Security radios shifted tone. Head turns began at the perimeter, then spread inward through the staff, then the guests. A black SUV rolled in first, then a second, then a third. Not flashy, not noisy, disciplined. The kind of arrival that does not ask whether it is expected. Conversations around the garden softened. A senior guest near the fountain lowered his drink halfway. One of the event coordinators whispered into her earpiece. The lead vehicle stopped. A security officer stepped out first, then another. Then the rear passenger door opened, and Amara Nwosu emerged. The atmosphere changed before anybody even found the right words. She wore a deep emerald gown cut with ruthless elegance, simple enough to signal restraint, powerful enough to command memory. No excessive jewelry, no theatrical smile. Her hair was swept back. Her posture was calm. Two professional security women moved behind and slightly beside her, not because she needed attention, but because she had crossed into the level of business where attention comes whether you welcome it or not. Guests turned fully now. Some recognized her face. Others recognized the effect. Khalil's smile disappeared so subtly that only Vanessa noticed. "That's her?" Vanessa whispered. But Khalil did not answer, because the woman stepping onto that estate was not the Amara he had invited in his mind. This woman did not look wounded enough to satisfy him. She did not look hesitant enough to flatter him. She looked like someone arriving at a place where her time was valuable. The whispers began. "That's Amara Nwosu. Meridian Bridge? She's bigger than Meridian now. I heard her fund just closed in Nairobi. Is that why security is with her? She advises the Atlantic Corridor Committee, doesn't she? No, not advises. She influences it." Each sentence was quiet. Each sentence was a blade. Amara walked forward with measured ease, acknowledging greetings with a slight nod, never rushing to fill silence, never scanning the crowd for Khalil the way he had once expected she always would. That was the first real injury. Not her beauty, not the convoy, not even the whispers. Her indifference. Khalil had imagined discomfort. What he got instead was irrelevance. Then came the second blow. The chairman of the Cairo consortium broke away from his group and went directly to her. Not to Khalil, to her. He extended both hands warmly. "Ms. Nwosu," he said with unmistakable respect. "I'm glad you made it. We should speak before tomorrow's session." Tomorrow's session. 3 nearby investors heard that, and because elite spaces run on implication more than announcement, they instantly recalculated her position in the room. Vanessa noticed it too. Her expression tightened. Amara smiled politely. "Of course," she said. "We'll speak after the ceremony." Khalil finally moved toward her. The crowd did not part dramatically. It simply adjusted around the collision that everyone could sense was coming. He stopped in front of her with the smile of a man trying to recover authorship of a scene that no longer belonged to him. "Amara," he said, "I'm surprised you came." She looked at him for one brief second. Her face held no anger, only recognition. The kind you reserve for a chapter that no longer has jurisdiction over your life. "You sent an invitation," she said calmly. "It would have been impolite not to respect your event." Vanessa arrived beside him, beautiful and composed, though the effort in her face was beginning to show. Amara turned to her first. "Congratulations," she said. It was not sarcastic. That somehow made it worse. Vanessa forced a smile. "Thank you." Khalil searched Amara's face for something old. Pain, jealousy, regret, anything. He found nothing accessible. I didn't expect such a grand entrance, he said, trying for humor. Amara glanced lightly toward the vehicles. Neither did I, she replied. My team insisted. Recent negotiations have made them cautious. Negotiations. Another word. Another signal. Khalil's jaw shifted almost invisibly. Then one of his board advisors approached too quickly, leaned near him, and whispered something that changed his expression completely. Not publicly, but enough. Amara noticed. She noticed everything. What is it? Vanessa asked under her breath. Khalil ignored her. The advisor whispered again, more urgently. This time Khalil looked directly at Amara, and the confidence he had been wearing all afternoon cracked for the first time. Because the whisper had carried information he was never supposed to receive in the middle of his own wedding. Meridian Bridge, through a layered acquisition structure, had just secured controlling influence over the debt vehicle holding Khalil's most over-leveraged freight expansion. Not his whole empire. Something worse. The vulnerable part of it. The part currently being reviewed by corridor financiers. And one of the signatures that would help determine whether he got breathing room belonged indirectly to the woman standing in front of him. He looked at her more carefully now. Not as an ex-wife. As a threat. Amara's voice remained gentle. Is everything all right? He swallowed his pride before answering. Can we talk? Her eyes shifted briefly toward the decorated aisle, the flowers, the guests, the orchestra waiting for cue. You should focus on your ceremony, she said. Amara. It was the first time all day his voice had sounded uncertain. Vanessa stared between them. The nearby guests pretended not to listen with the skill of people who built entire lives around listening discreetly. Khalil lowered his tone. When did this happen? Amara held his gaze. When you were busy making sure I remembered my place? The answer was quiet. That made it devastating. He stepped closer. You planned this. No, she said. You planned this wedding. You planned the invitation. You planned the humiliation. I simply accepted the invitation as the woman I became after you underestimated me. He had no response ready, because the old Amara would have explained herself. The old Amara would have defended her motives. This one did not need to. The officiant signaled discreetly that it was time. Staff started guiding guests toward their seats. The music lifted. Khalil looked trapped inside two collapsing realities at once. The wedding he had staged, and the business foundation beneath his image, which was suddenly no longer stable. Vanessa spoke through a tight smile. Khalil, we need to begin. He nodded automatically, but his eyes stayed on Amara. For the first time in years, he was no longer the calmest person in the room. Amara stepped aside as guests moved toward the ceremony seating. She could have left then. That would have been enough. But life had one final lesson for Khalil, and it arrived 10 minutes later during the reception. After the vows, after the applause, after the photographs designed to immortalize happiness, the Mensa family patriarch raised a glass to thank their distinguished guests. Then he said something Khalil had not been prepared to hear in public. And a special acknowledgement, the older man announced, to Ms. Amara Nwosu, whose strategic insight and partnership discussions may soon help shape one of the most important trade corridors in this region. We are honored by her presence. Applause followed. Real applause. Not for the bride, not for the groom. For her. Khalil stood beside Vanessa, smiling because there are humiliations too expensive to reveal honestly in public. Amara inclined her head once. Nothing more. No speech, no performance, no triumph. Because true power rarely needs to explain itself to the room. Later, as the sky turned indigo and the estate lights deepened, Khalil found her alone near the edge of the terrace overlooking the water. The music was softer there. The laughter from inside sounded far away. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then he said, "Did you come here to punish me?" Amara looked out across the dark water. "No." He gave a humorless laugh. "This feels like punishment." She turned toward him at last. "That's because for the first time, you are standing in a moment you cannot control." Khalil's face hardened. "You could destroy this expansion." "I could," she said. "But that isn't the question." "Then what is?" She studied him with the calm of someone who no longer needed his self-image to survive. "The question is whether you finally understand the difference between having people around you and valuing them before they become powerful enough to leave you behind." He looked away first. Not because he wanted to, because he had to. Years earlier, he had asked her who she was without him. Tonight, he had his answer. She was the woman who built herself in silence while he mistook her quiet for emptiness. She was the woman who learned structure after surviving betrayal. She was the woman who no longer needed revenge because reality had developed better taste than anger. Khalil spoke more softly now. "Amara, I was wrong." She almost smiled, but not from pleasure, from distance. "Wrong is when you misread numbers," she said. "What you did was character." The sentence landed cleanly. No drama, no raised voice, just truth. Inside, the reception music swelled again. Guests laughed. Glasses clinked. Somebody called for the couple. Khalil stood there in his tailored tuxedo at his own wedding, looking less powerful than he had in the one-bedroom apartment where she first met him. Because power borrowed from applause is fragile. And the people who confuse love with ownership usually discover too late that dignity can become an empire when it is left alone long enough. Amara stepped back slightly. "My office will contact yours," she said. "If your company wants cooperation, it will be evaluated professionally. Nothing personal." Nothing personal. That was the final reversal. He had made their marriage personal when it should have been sacred. She made their business future professional when it could have been revenge. And that difference was the entire story. She turned and walked toward the waiting security team. No hurry, no victory pose, no final glance over her shoulder. She did not need one. The convoy doors opened. The engines started. And as Amara Nwosu left the estate, half the guests were still pretending they had not just watched the center of the wedding shift away from the bride and groom and settle, without permission, on the woman who had once been invited there to feel small. Khalil remained on the terrace a moment longer, listening to the music of a celebration that no longer sounded like triumph. Because some men think the worst thing a woman can do after heartbreak is come back for revenge. They are wrong. The most dangerous thing she can do is come back complete. And the cruelest part for Khalil Durojaye was not that Amara arrived with bodyguards. It was not the convoy. It was not the applause. It was not even the business leverage. It was the realization that by the time he saw her value, the world had already seen it first.